There have been a lot of shifts in competitive Pokemon recently, with a lot of powerful Pokemon who were once OU staples now being ranked UU or RU. So I wanted to basically find a way to find out what makes a good Pokemon good, purely in competitive singles. So I narrowed it down to 4 factors: its ability, stats, typing, and move pool. Starting with move pool, which I think is the most important factor of a Pokemon's success, at 34%. Move pool I consider the most important factor, basically because out of these 4, it's also the one that could be the biggest nerf. I did a video talking about min-max Pokemon who sucked or fell short of their potential, and one of them was Mega Pidgeot. It was a pretty good Pokemon who was ranked UUBL, but was stuck in purgatory, mainly because, while Hurricanes that never miss in our stat is really great, it didn't have Focus Blast. It would have been the perfect tool for its arsenal, but it just didn't get it. Move pools are essential for any role you want to take on. If you're a sweeper, you should have Swords Dance, another boosting move, or a good stab move. If you're a wall, you should have reliable recovery. A nerf pool is also the most damaging thing to a Pokemon. For example, in Generation 9, infamously, move pools were nerfed. Specifically, Scald. Last gen, there were 10 Pokemon who added in the OU tier. This gen, there's only 2. And a Pokemon that suffered a lot because of it was Toxapex. Toxapex is a defensive powerhouse. It was one of my favorite Pokemon to run because it was kind of unkillable. It had a great move pool and an amazing ability in Regenerator. However, now it's ranked UU. The main reason is because it got nerfed. It no longer has Knockoff and it does not have Scald, so it is now no longer the ultimate utility Pokemon. However, we could also say the opposite. For example, in Generation 9, Zamazenta did not have Body Press for some unknown reason, and now in Generation 9, it does, and it's one of the most menacing Pokemon in the OU tier. Regieleki is the fastest Pokemon ever with an amazing ability. It's a great special type electric Pokemon, but it was ranked UU in its debut generation because it didn't have perfect coverage. However, in Generation 9, it can now run an Ice-type Terra Blast, and just because of that one move, it shot up to Uber. Move pools are incredibly important. You can have the perfect ability, the perfect typing, and the perfect stats, but if you don't have the right moves to use, you're useless. The next factor I want to talk about is abilities, which is almost as important at 25%. When we take a look at some of the best Pokemon in the role, almost all of them have an ability that perfectly complements their role. Well, maybe not the best example currently, Chansey and Blissey. If they had Hyper Cutter, that would have definitely made a dent in their competitive success. They're already super hard to take out via special attacks, so the fact that you can't really cripple them because of a natural cure only adds to their role. It makes them even better. And there are some Pokemon that straight up struggle to even be viable without their ability. For example, Dugtrio. In Generation 3, it is ranked OU and it's one of the best Pokemon there because it has the ability to trap Chansey and kill it via Arena Trap. However, in most tiers/gens, Arena Trap is illegal, which means that it has a lot of trouble finding success. From one gen to another, when Arena Trap was made illegal, Dugtrio fell from OU to ZU. For some Pokemon, their abilities are literally their saving grace. Blaziken debuted at UUBL. It was pretty average, and in the next tier, it fell to UU. It was definitely going to be one of those Pokemon that just kept falling lower and lower into obscurity until hidden abilities were introduced in Generation 5 and it got speed boost. From one gen to another, it went from UU to Uber just because this ability made it a really deadly sweeper. On the other side of the spectrum, we also have Slacking and Regigigas, Pokemon that would have been amazing and even had a really important role in the Uber tier if they had a normal ability. 2 topics which I've explored before. So because of that, I feel like it deserves a very heavy percentage at 25. Typing is pretty close at 22% because likewise, there are some Pokemon which, maybe not purely, but they're majorly just characterized by their typing. To start off with an example, Avalugg. Avalugg is meant to be a pretty much the ultimate physically defensive Pokemon, the counterpart to Blissey, even better than Skarmory. However, in its debut generation, it was ranked PU. It has an amazing move pool in Rapid Spin, Recover, Toxic, Roar, Iron Defense, and Gyro Ball. It could have been great, but unfortunately, it has an Ice type. And it's not really just that it's one of the worst defensive types, it's the fact that it has to be a physically defensive Pokemon, and 3 out of the 4 types Ice is weak against are physically oriented types. For example, Chansey and Blissey's normal typing may seem kinda meh, but it's actually perfect. Because it only has a weakness to fighting, it can basically take on any special move. The only special fighting type moves that are relevant are Aura Sphere and Focus Blast. Focus Blast is Focus Blast, and Aura Fear has terrible distribution. Besides that, there's also Sacred Sword and Psyshock, but that's 4 moves that she has to worry about. That's basically nothing. Next, we can talk about Azumarill. Azumarill has one of the best abilities offensively ever in huge power. However, it never made it to the OU tier until Generation 6, where it got the Fairy typing, which is great offensively and defensively. This one thing was able to take a Pokemon who had been UU for the longest time and break it all the way to OU. So defensively or offensively, typing is super important. Last thing is stats. I don't think I need to convince you that stats are important. However, at 18%, I can definitely see why a lot of people would be wondering why it's ranked so low. There's honestly a very simple answer to this. Look at the lower tiers. It's filled with Pokemon who have great or amazing stats, but they're still in the lower tiers. And the reason is because even if they have great stats, they're missing in at least one or multiple departments that I talked about that have a higher percentage of the pie. For example, Florges. It has a great move pool and great stats. Perfect for especially defensive Pokemon. And it has a good typing and Fairy, which is pretty rare. However, it's missing one thing, a good ability. So it gets outdone by other Pokemon. Great stats weren't enough to save it. Or we could talk about Gardevoir. Gardevoir versus Hatterene specifically. Stat-wise, not only is Gardevoir similar, but it's basically just an upgraded version of Hatterene. So why isn't it ranked higher? Hatterene has a better ability and move pool, essentially. And I know they don't have the same role, but if stats meant more than they do, then Gardevoir would have a higher usage rate than it does. A 10 out of 10 move pool, typing, and ability can make up for a lackluster speed stat or attack stat. Clafable is the perfect example of that. It does not have impressive stats. What it does have is an impressive move pool. Even before the Fairy typing, Clafable was super annoying to deal with, but move pool and typing were enough to make it always relevant. Its stats didn't really matter that much. It could be both offensively menacing or defensively menacing without having good stats at all, which is why stats are at the lowest percentage. It's overall really difficult to illustrate what makes a good Pokemon good because different things matter more for more Pokemon, but I feel like this was a pretty okay attempt at it.